Aloha, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Thomas Cummings, and I am a cultural resource person at Bishop Museum, where we create programs and deliver them to students. I was born on the island of Maui and graduated from Lahaina Luna Boarding School in 1955. And I've always been involved with the teaching of Hawaiian culture to students in the classrooms throughout the state. Aloha kako. I'm going to tell you about Pauahi and her legacy. I'll have you meet her. I'll tell you something about her good husband. And I'll let you meet her parents and the rest of her relatives, so that when I'm finished, you have a good idea about how important she was to us, why we hold her in high esteem. It's a love story, and everybody loves a love story. And to begin, I need to just tell you that she was consumed by fire. What an interesting name. It is her middle name, Pauahi, which she gets from her grand aunt. And yet when you look at this woman, you would never know that she was going to get national prominence other than her parents. And so I'd like for you to meet her father first. This is a picture of him that you're seeing now. His name was Abner Pauahi. He was a person of high rank. And he's important because of some of the collections that we have in Bishop Museum. For example, we have his surfboard that he used. It was 14.5 feet long and 150 pounds. And he lugged it under his arms when he went surfing in Waikiki. So that was Pauahi's father. Then we have Pauahi's mother, and that image is coming up to you right now. She was the granddaughter of Kamehameha the Great. So you can tell that Pauahi, just by her parents, was going to be a person of importance by birth. You ought to meet the rest of her family, and I'm going to have that done now. First of all, I would like for you to know that she comes from Kamehameha, and that's his image that you're looking at now. And if we were talking about his most favorite wife, then we would talk about Ka'ahumanu. This is an image of her. But she's not important to the story that we're going to talk about when we tell you about Pauahi. It's about the other members of her family. So you have Kamehameha, and then next to him, the image is coming up now, is you have his favorite wife, his most sacred wife, whose name is Keopulani. She is so sacred that Kamehameha has to pay homage to her, hoping that the children that he has from her will be recognized by the people as most sacred. And they have 2 children. And you need to be introduced to them as well. The first one is Liho Liho. This is his image that you're looking at now. And the other son of Kamehameha and Keopulani are Kauikeo'ule. What's important is they do not leave any surviving heirs. So we have to look at another wife, whose name is Kalakua. And this is her image that you're looking at. And Kalakua has a daughter whose name is Kina'u. This is her picture that you're looking at right now. And Kina'u has 2 sons, the grandsons of Kamehameha, which you need to meet at this time. The oldest son was Lot Kamehameha. And then the other brother, whose name was Alexander Liho Liho, named after their uncle. And these 2 grandsons, Alexander Liho Liho and Lot Kamehameha, leave no children. So we look at another wife of Kamehameha, whose name is Kani'i Kapole, or Kani Kapole. And she has a son whose name is Ka'uleoku. And Ka'uleoku has a daughter whose name is Konia, who is Kamehameha's granddaughter. And from Kunia, you have Pauahi, the woman that you're looking at right now. Even though you've been introduced to the members of her family, you wouldn't know that she was going to gain national prominence because of where she was born. And then later, she's given away, hanai, by Kina'o. Pauahi is born in the town of Honolulu. It's a very small town by this time. There are no roads, only trails throughout. And you could get from Pauahi's house, her halepili, to the beach in 5 minutes. She's born in a typical halepili, much like this, surrounded by her parents and servants. They love Pauahi. She's their beloved. But after 2 weeks, Pauahi is given away to Kina'o. That's that woman that you see in the middle of the screen. And Kina'o is going to raise Pauahi for 8 years. I like to use this image because if you see in the background, you can see the thatched houses of Honolulu at that time, with the Christian church in the background. And off to the side, you see Po'ehaole, foreigners who are beginning to settle in Hawaii by this time. While Pauahi is being raised, hanai, by Kina'o, let me introduce you to another member of Pauahi's family, and I need to go back 600 years to Umi'aliloa, who comes from the valley of Waipio on the island of Hawaii. Umi'aliloa is a warrior chief who overthrows his murderous brother. And Hawaiians believe that you could overthrow cruel chiefs and replace them if you are going to be generous and kind to them. And that's what Umi does, this warrior chief. He becomes the ruler of Waipio Valley and all of the island of Hawaii. And then over the next 300 years, you have the succession of chiefs and their wives until you get to Kamehameha the Great, who himself overthrows his cousin and takes rulership over the island of Hawaii. And I like to show this image of the statue of Kamehameha in front of Iolani Palace because of the sash that you see around that statue's body. That's a cape, that's a cloak, that's a sash that belonged to Kamehameha, but it belonged to Umi'aliloa. It was 11 feet long, 12 inches wide, made out of the feathers, those precious feathers of the forest. And we have that sash in our collection today. So you understand why Pauahi wanted to have Bishop Museum to keep not only surfboards, but these precious sashes and all of the collections that people come to enjoy. Now let me go back to Kina'o. Pauahi is being raised by her for 8 years, then she dies. And when she dies, Pauahi is immediately returned to her parents, but just for a short time, for days, because she's quickly taken to the Chief's Children's School in 1839. This school. And the headmaster of that school is Mr. Cook and his wife. And while Pauahi and these other chief children are going there, they're learning English, learning math, learning science, learning geography, learning how to paint, learning music. In fact, Pauahi gets so good at music that later in her life she can teach and she can perform for audiences. Nearby is Kauaihau Church, where Pauahi and these children are expected to attend daily services because they're going to become Christians. And daily they study the Bible, learning about the Lord Jesus Christ, who charges all to take care of their neighbor, to love their neighbor, not unlike Hawaiian values. And as Pauahi is going to this school, she's going to be there for 10 years. When she's 16 years old, she meets Charles in 1847. Charles Reed Bishop from Glens Falls, New York, an insignificant bookkeeper who comes to the school when they're having a party, and he meets Pauahi for the first time, and he's struck by her. She's poised and she's attractive, and he falls in love with her, and she falls in love with him. They want to get married. But let me return to the image of Paki, Pauahi's father, who says, no, no, you cannot marry Charles. I want you to marry Lot, Kamehameha, your cousin, because I promised you to him when you were a little child. And Pauahi says, I would rather die than marry him. It would be like putting me in a coffin. Pauahi even goes to see Lot and says to him, will you free me of my obligation to marry you? And he says, yes. But Pauahi, the father, says, no. And so Pauahi and Charles get married anyway. But when they get married, it's a simple ceremony at the school that Pauahi is going to, because Pauahi's father, and Kunia, Pauahi's mother, do not come to the wedding. They are not approving of that union. It doesn't matter to Charles and Pauahi. They go to Kauai on their honeymoon. When they come back, Pauahi has a little cottage that she's taking care of as Charles is starting his banking business. After a while, the father, Pauahi, comes to visit, and he notices something about Charles. That Charles is not a lazy man, that he's industrious. And he notices as well that Charles takes care of Pauahi. So Pauahi begins to approve of Charles and that marriage. And then shortly after that, Pauahi dies, and Pauahi and Charles move to Haleakala Mansion, this mansion here, where there are 30 servants to wait on Pauahi. And now Pauahi has inherited 16,000 acres. Pauahi is going to take care of her mother, Kunia, and going to take care of this woman, Liliuokalani, who is 7 years younger than Pauahi. We see her as the queen here in this image, so one wonders, how is it that Liliu becomes the queen when Pauahi ought to become the queen? And we'll learn how that happens as we continue with the story of Pauahi. But let's return to the mansion. With all of these servants, it doesn't matter to Pauahi. She wants to do the sewing. She wants to do the cooking. She works out in the garden. She even sits under the trees that you can see off to the side, meeting with her landlords, all of those 16,000 acres, to make sure that they're managing the land and taking care of the people on the land. Pauahi also meets with the people, listening to them, giving them advice, making house visits, sending them food. But there is one thing above all that Pauahi wants. They've been married for 12 years and she still wants a child. Where am I going to get that child from, she says. So she goes to Luka, her cousin. She's pregnant. She's hapai. And Pauahi says to Luka, Luka, can I have your baby? And she says, yes, of course. You see, that's that Hanai system that they had, where you give away your child to some member of the family so that you can solidify the family. So Luka agrees to give away the child to Pauahi. But Lot, who is the king by this time, says, no, I don't want you to have that baby. I want the baby for myself. I will raise that child of Luka's. And when I leave the throne, this child will ascend to the throne. So Ruth, Luka, and Pauahi are in a dilemma what to do. But they set in motion a plan. On the night that Luka is going to have her baby, Pauahi is there beside her. When the baby is delivered, Pauahi bundles the baby up and takes it to her place. In the meantime, Lot here is waiting at his place to be told that the baby has been born so he can pick it up. When he hears that Pauahi has taken away the baby to her own place, he's obsessed. He's upset. But there's nothing he can do because Pauahi is as powerful as he is. And now Pauahi has this little boy, her precious, which he's going to take care of for 6 months. And then after 6 months, the child dies of illness. And Pauahi is distraught. She tries to adopt another child from one of her cousins, but they won't give it up. And so Pauahi is without child and has to move on with her life, which she does. Until in 1872, Pauahi is offered the throne. Lot's at the throne at this time. He's unmarried and he's at his deathbed. So he calls for Pauahi. And he says to her, I want you to become the queen. And she says, no, no, I don't want to become the queen. Choose somebody else. And he presses on, you ought to be the queen. And she says, no, not me. Make Luca the queen. She is your sister. Or Emma, let her be the queen. She was the queen once when your brother was the queen. And so Lot does not choose a successor when he dies, which means because Pauahi has refused the throne, that there will be no more Kamehamehas on the throne. And that explains why you have this image of Lunalilo, who becomes the king. He's elected. And after Lunalilo, Kalakaua becomes the king. He's associated with Iolani Palace. And after Kalakaua dies, then you have Liliuokalani, who becomes the queen. That 7-year-old girl, that girl who was 7 years old, younger than Pauahi, who is going to become the queen. And there are no hard feelings between Liliuokalani and Pauahi, because Pauahi is going to move on with her life. She's going to travel in 1875. Then she comes back to Honolulu after traveling for 2 years, resumes her private life, and then she gets that gift from Luca. They look like this about this time as they're traveling to England, to Ireland, to Scotland, up to Switzerland, down to France, down to Germany, visiting churches and art galleries and opera houses and museums. And we think that's when it occurred to Pauahi that she ought to build a museum when they return to Hawaii, so that she can show her family things in them. After traveling abroad, Pauahi and Charles returned to Hawaii. And so Luca gives this house to Pauahi, plus 355,000 acres, which means that Pauahi has in her ownership by this time some 377,000 acres. That would be as much land as 47% of the island of Oahu, or all of the island of Molokai. Charles, what am I going to do with that land and the wealth that comes from it? They must have said to each other. Well, we know that they're going to build a museum. It's there for us to see. But what else, Charles? Pauahi says to her husband. And then it occurs to Pauahi that she's going to use the wealth that comes from her land to educate the children of Hawaii, to give children of Hawaii their education so that they can take care of themselves and take care of their children. So Charles builds the school in 1887 and the museum in 1889. And the reason why I say that is because the school and the museum were one and the same. This is Bishop Museum today. This is Bishop Museum back then, and you can begin to see these young boys that Pauahi is going to start to educate. You can see Bishop Museum from the air. And I'm going to zero in on Hawaiian Hall, which you can see here. And then you can see Bishop Hall on the side. Off to the right, you can see the dormitories for the boys. And below the campus, you can see the classrooms. Charles, I want you to build a school for the girls as well, not only for the boys. And so as you look at the lower part of your image, and we zoom in on that, you can see the girls' school. Then when the school gets too large, all of these students move up to the slope where you can see that school today from the downward side of Bishop Museum. I want you to meet the children that Pauahi educated. And as you're introduced to these children, I want you to note that when you look at their faces, they come from other places. For by this time, Pauahi is witness to a land that is being settled by people from the United States and from Europe and from Asia and from the middle of Pacific. So that when you look at these children, you can see what they look like. The boys in their classroom settings, all expected to do daily prayers, learning a skill that they can use when they get married, sewing, learning to cook, all lining up to go to their classes. And this is the school what it looks like today, and the classroom today that students are attending, from the youngest age to the very oldest, where academics and scholarship is expected of the students, where ROTC was big at one time, which explains the uniforms and the rifles. But they're going to have sports programs, football and others as well, where music, Western music is important, as well as Hawaiian music. And then the hula comes back, so the students can dance. That all of these students having a social life, enjoying themselves, coming from different nations. And they all pay homage to Pauahi, the old ones as the young ones, saying thank you to Pauahi. What's interesting about seeing these images is that Pauahi does not see these children. For she dies in 1884. She's 52 years old. And Charles is beside her when she dies. She dies of cancer. Her body, when she dies, is taken up to Mount Allah, where she's buried. 900 people line the streets to say goodbye to her and grieve her passing. When she dies, Charles builds the school and the museum, and then he leaves for California. And he stays there for 30 years, separated from Pauahi for 30 years, and when he dies at 93, his body is returned to Hawaii so he can be buried beside his beloved Pauahi. I told you at the beginning of this presentation that this was a love story. And so this is a love story between this man from Glens Falls, New York, and this woman from Hawaii, and the good that they do. It's also a love story of Pauahi, who was obedient to her ancestors. Those ancestors that told her, you take care of the people, make sure that they're cared for, and she did that. It's a love story of a woman who could not have any children, and yet she's had thousands of children for the last 100 years, and she intends to have 100 years from now more children to educate. Now you understand why we hold Pauahi in high esteem. And so as we look at this young woman, from whom we are the beneficiaries for her gift to all of us, we say mahalo Pauahi. Thank you.